Hi. Hi guys. Okay, today I actually want to start a series of videos. I think there might be 3 to 5 of these videos that I want to make, and they are about ADHD, but also God's perspective on ADHD, and how we can, I don't know, just gain encouragement and inspiration from God's word. So, what I want to say is this. First of all, I think that those of us that have ADHD, we can live a very wonderfully colorful life, right? Um, we can have lots of successes, but also what most of society would deem as failures. And although we might not necessarily feel like we're failing at life, it gets to a point where we do actually begin to internalize these messages that are being sent to us. This will be in childhood and throughout our teens. We start to internalize this idea that there's something obviously wrong with us because we're not with it. We get told that we're not being very wise, or we're not being very smart, or we're impulsive and we're not sober minded, and instead we learn that we are a bit irrational and irresponsible. I know what I did with those kinds of messages. I decided that, well, if this is what the world thinks of me, I'm just going to start playing into it anyway, because who cares what I do? I'm only going to be impulsive, irrational, and irresponsible anyway. We can feel very overwhelmed and hopeless, I guess, hopeless and helpless when we start to internalize these kinds of messages that those of us with ADHD, we certainly get a lot of. Primarily because our behavior just doesn't really fit in with what's expected. You know, we go to school where we are expected to be orderly and line up and sit in class quietly and just listen for a long period of time and pay attention and to actually learn big chunks of information. And then during lunchtime, most kids have their one thing that they like to do. They're either playing basketball, or they're playing soccer, or they're hanging out with friends, sort of chatting and doing not much at all. And like for me, actually, I could have really been one of those sporty kids playing basketball every lunch hour. I really could have been, but I just didn't make the cut. It wasn't like I was viewed as a sporty person. It wasn't like I knew anyone in the sporty groups. So instead of playing basketball, I would end up just hanging out with my friends. And that got a bit sort of dull very quickly, because what were we doing? We were just sitting around chatting. And so I very easily came up with a lot of fun for me and my friends, just doing really dumb stuff. And being so caught up in the dumb stuff meant that when the bell went off to return to class, I'd often be really late because I had just been having so much fun with all the fun stuff we were doing, whether it was having a big water fight or throwing our hats around, and then I had to go back to class and couldn't find my hat. And you had to be in full uniform at all times and things like that. So we, the world as it is designed today just doesn't really suit the ADHD mind. And so we very quickly learn that we're just not good enough. But where does God stand with all of this? After all, He knows what kind of brain we have, right? And He also knows our hearts well and truly. He knows that we don't always mean to be that impulsive and irrational and irresponsible person. He knows the intentions that we have, and those of us with ADHD, we tend to be a little childlike in our approach to life, and more often than not, if you speak to us and get to know us, you'll probably find that we have a very different viewpoint on life, and probably don't have the same intentions that the next person might have, with the same behavior that was exhibited. Those of us also that who are women, we also are often brought up being taught that we need to eventually become a good mom and a good wife. And especially if you're South American, being brought up with South American values, it's very, very, very strongly, widely held as a value, to become that really good wife and that really good mum that does all the house things like cooking and cleaning and now I can hear a lawnmower in my background. I swear every single time I want to do a video, like, this happens. It's so frustrating. I will stop right now and close a few doors and windows. I'll be back. Okay, so I am back. Okay, so where was I? I was actually chatting about how us women can get taught that that's it's an expected end to go on to become a good mother and housewife and everything like that. And if we don't meet that, if we grow up and don't actually become that, which again, many of us women with ADHD, we don't necessarily become that unless that's a special interest of yours. And we can be deemed as lazy, also as uninterested and disengaged, if we're not extremely social. And ultimately we start to feel like, well, what are we good for? We're good for nothing because we don't cook and we don't clean and we don't host and we don't socialize and things like that. So I can definitely relate to that. That's me. I have hosted wonderful dinner parties in the past. It comes with a lot of hard work, a lot of effort, because there's so much to concentrate on, and the ADHD brain is really not great at that. I also am quite heightened when I'm hosting, and I need everything to be spick and span before the people arrive, and I'm very, very like extremely organized, and I have the meals ready to go and salads ready to go and cheese and crackers ready to go, and I have to be, it's like a whole project that I have to throw myself into. I really love the time with my friends, don't get me wrong there, but in my the recent years, I've decided, you know what, life is just so busy and so overwhelming, just waking up every day that and just doing life at a very basic level is just so busy for me, that I don't do dinner parties anymore. I'd much rather meet with my friends at a coffee shop and leave all the cooking and hosting in that sense to someone else. So because when we don't meet that societal expectation, we can be told that we're all those things, lazy and uninterested, and maybe that we're snobby, or that we're we're just not engaged in the friendship or in the relationship. But deep down, it's not actually true. It's not true that we're lazy. It's not true that we're disengaged. Now, it can get pretty bad mentally, for our mental health, when we focus on feeling what that feels like to not meet society's expectations, and we can, if we're not, if we're vulnerable, mentally, emotionally, psychologically vulnerable, we can begin to feel worthless. So again, I ask the question, where does God stand with all of this? Today, I would like to talk about one person in the Bible that showed a potentially ADHD symptom. but I want to do a couple of these videos where I mention a few people in the Bible. There's 3 off the top of my head that I've been kind of pondering on the last few weeks. I've been wanting to make this video, and I thought I would include the 3 people in the Bible in the one video, but that's not going to be the case. As I put my notes together, I realized, oh, there's so much to unpack and flesh out here, and I also really enjoy reading straight from the Bible, so I will be doing that for you as well. Now, there are various symptoms that these different people in the Bible exhibit that might potentially be ADHD symptoms, and I'm going to list them for you now. We're going to talk about someone that exhibited impulsivity. We're going to talk about someone that exhibited overwhelm and the need for freedom, the need to escape. We're going to talk about someone who exhibited emotional dysregulation. We're also going to talk about someone who exhibited the symptom of laziness. And we're going to talk about someone who exhibited the symptom of misplaced hyperfocus / stress and / overwhelm again. So they're 5 symptoms that I want to unpack in these next few videos, and I hope you come along for the ride and enjoy them if you want to know where God stands with all of those. So today, let's get into the symptom of impulsivity. The person that I thought of in the Bible who was very impulsive in his choice was a man called Peter. So for those of you who don't know who Peter is, Peter was a follower of Jesus, and when Jesus was near, it was getting close to the time where Jesus was going to be arrested. Now, Jesus did not ever do anything against the actual law. He was arrested completely incorrectly. He was, I guess, incorrectly accused, right? And Jesus knew this was going to happen, and he kept telling his disciples, who were his mates essentially, kept saying to them, look, this is what's going to happen to me. And Peter was often the one that said, no, that's not going to happen to you. And Jesus would be like, just calm down, because this needs to happen, right? And then come the night where all the high priests and these were the high priests came along, and I think maybe some authorities came to look for Jesus, where he was kind of hiding out, not really hiding out. He was in his quiet place in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he often just went to pray, but they knew that's where they could find him. So they've come along and they're about to they're looking for him. They're like, we're looking for Jesus, and Jesus is like, well, here I am. And Peter, he went up to a servant and drew his sword out and went for it. He struck this servant. And we find this story in, let me look up my notes, in John. Okay, so if you have a Bible or the Bible app, look up John chapter 18, and we're going to go to verse 10, and it says, then Simon Peter, because I guess that was his full name, Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So I find it really interesting, by the way, that we actually get to find out what the servant's name was. There's so many stories in the Bible where we don't get told the person's name, and they are forever known as the person without a name, but who is known for this, X, Y, Z. In this story, God takes the time to tell us, oh, by the way, this guy's name was Malchus. Well, nice to meet you, Malchus. So Peter's gone to hit him in some way with the sword, and he ends up cutting off his ear. And when we stop and think about that, For starters, well, we don't know how often Peter found himself in a position to use his sword. I think that's the first we hear of it. If you ever read the life story of Jesus and all his missions and what he got up to, there's never at any point where it mentions that him and his disciples had to draw their swords and battle it out. That wasn't the kind of life that Jesus led. But here we find Peter he has a sword for some reason, and he just pulls it out, strikes this guy, and the ear is chopped off. I personally believe that was a moment of impulsivity, because at no point prior was there any discussion in great depth as to what was going to happen or what the disciples were going to do if and when they came for Jesus. In Luke 22, however, there is a little bit of a question like prior that isn't mentioned here in John. So if you go to Luke chapter 22, verse 49, it says, when Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, so this is at the point where the mob has come to arrest Jesus, they saw what was going to happen. They said, Lord, should we strike with our swords? Then it goes on to verse 50. And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. So it seems to me that the disciples wondered, should they go into battle for Jesus? Jesus doesn't even get to answer before Peter just actually pulls the sword out and just chops the guy's ear off. Now so it seems to me that this is just a really impulsive decision. He's not even waited for Jesus' answer. The disciples are kind of wondering, are we going to go into a big fat fight now? There's no actual conclusion or answer for that question before Peter just goes whack. So now I want to, talk about the kind of impulsivity that those of us with ADHD can have. I told a story in a previous video where I was waiting for the train at the correct platform. Suddenly a train comes behind me at the next platform within running distance, and I've impulsively and for no reason at all run towards that train and hopped on and ended up going in the wrong direction and ended up all over town that day because for some reason impulsivity kicked in, and for no reason at all I've ended up on the wrong train. Other people with ADHD experience this when it comes to, they go window shopping, but then it kind of goes from window shopping to coming home with 10 bags of shopping because the impulsivity has kicked in and they're like, oh my goodness, I'm in love with all these things and I can't stop, and they're just buying and going crazy with it. Other types of impulsivity that I've experienced in life is like, especially when I was young, it was like I'd be watching TV and quite calm and happy, and then all of a sudden I'm dying to just get out of the house and go dancing for the night. So thankfully I had a really cool flatmate who was my bestie, and the same thing would happen to her too. Like we would just suddenly look at each other, and it's like 11 p.m, right? But we've been watching TV on a Friday night, and we look at each other and be like, you thinking what I'm thinking? Yeah, let's do it. And we'd just go and get changed like in 5 minutes and just be out the door and into town a half hour later, just dancing the night away. Yeah, and this kind of thing can happen all the time. Like these are very mild versions of impulsivity compared to what Peter did that day. None of us are going around chopping people's ears off. But I thought that was a perfect example of impulsivity. Now I actually want to read, what did Jesus do actually? What did Jesus do under those circumstances? Did he turn around and berate Peter and go, how dare you? You're worthless. You and your impulsivity. You're so impulsive. You need to change. You need to just go home. And did Jesus do any of that? No, he didn't. And I point this out because that is how we often treat ourselves. Probably because we heard these kinds of words when we were kids and when we were at school. We heard these kinds of words. Maybe not per se, but like I remember so many times like chatting away with my friend in class, and then suddenly I'd notice that the whole classroom was quiet and the teacher would be like, Alicia, you are the only one we're waiting on so we can get started with class, you know? And it was like, it made you feel like, oh my goodness, like it was very humiliating. Very humiliating, but it happened so many times. So let's see what Jesus does. What did Jesus actually say or do? So if we go back to John chapter 18, verse 10, we read there again, Peter had a sword, he's drawn it and struck the servant and cut his ear off, and the servant's name was Malchus. Verse 11, it says, Jesus commanded Peter, put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? So I like that Jesus really doesn't go into this whole, like, he could have said, Peter, you know better than this. He could have said, Peter, how dare you? He could have said, Peter, you've really hurt this man. He could have said, Peter, get away. This is not for you to deal with. He could have said any number of things that might have made Peter feel like, whoa, embarrassed, humiliated, like he didn't belong, like he'd really truly done a most terrible thing. And yet Jesus doesn't do any of that. He says, put your sword away. And I like that. I like that Jesus will, and often he does, in the stories we read of Jesus, he doesn't ever judge. He doesn't judge us. He just tells us to stop doing the thing. He says to change your life. He says just go and sin no more. Like that's what he says. That's what he's all about. And then, of course, the drinking the cup thing, for if you don't quite understand what that means, is Jesus refers to drinking the cup from God as it's usually about the great mission that God had for him. The cup of the mission is like, it's a hard, very difficult cup to drink. And only Jesus could do what he did, and that is to die on the cross. So Jesus refers to it as the cup. It was even difficult for him as a human being while he was on earth to wrap his head around. So that's what the cup is, if you're not sure what that is. So he's saying to Peter, put your sword away. This is actually something I have to do, and I'm not going to not do it. So put your sword away. When we go back to Luke 22, we're going to go to verse 51. So Luke 22, verse 51, Luke gives another little, another bit more detail. So in verse 51, it says, but Jesus answered. So this is when the disciples have gone, Lord, do we need to strike with our swords? Peter's gone and done it in an impulsive minute. And Jesus then actually answers. So that's how quickly Peter moved, by the way. Jesus then actually answers and says, no more of this. And he touched the man's ear and healed him. And I really love that again. It's very similar to put your sword away. He's saying, no more of this. And that, again, I like to point out that Jesus doesn't berate us. He doesn't humiliate us. He doesn't make us feel worthless. He doesn't make us feel like we're never going to get there. He just says, don't do the thing anymore. Put it away. No more of this, you know? And then Luke tells us that he puts his own hand on the servant's head and heals his ear. And that is a big, massive clue to me that Jesus, he not only tells us to just not do the thing anymore, but he's there to help us, and he's there to work alongside us, to be able to move forward with our little quirks and our little mishaps and our moments of impulsivity. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, and I look forward to sharing some other stories of people from the Bible who have shown those other potential ADHD symptoms. Bye.